Welcome to Peacebuilding Initiatives. My name is José Barzola. Peacebuilding Initiatives is where we explore collaborative paths to foster healthy, positive relationships through dialogue, cross-cultural understanding, and the courageous act of shifting our own perspective. Thank you for joining us today. On today's episode, we're diving into critical and timely conversation titled Public Issues, Private Pain, the Impact of Poor Governance and Policies on Children and Families. We are joined again and honored to welcome back Dr. Jude Antonyappan, who is a distinguished professor at California State University, Sacramento, with over 25 years of experience at the intersection of law, social work, and education. It is really a joy to have her back again to take a deeper dive into different topics. And so I hope you've all been enjoying these. She holds a Ph.D. in social welfare and a Juris Doctor. Her work is deeply rooted in social justice, ethical leadership, and experiential learning. Jude is passionate about people-based justice, grounded in the belief that justice is ultimately about access to people solving problems. And especially in these challenging times, her expertise in mediation, conflict resolutions helps to bridge those divides, create space for healing and collaborative problem solving. Um, and as we explore how poor governance and short-sighted policies create lasting pain today, especially for children and families on the margins, Dr. Antonyappan helps us reframe these challenges, not just system issues, but as deeply human ones. So I look forward to getting started in today's conversation. So thank you so much, Jude, for coming back, and greatly appreciate you for being here. To get us started, just wanted to acknowledge the times that we are in. And so thank you for creating space and taking the time to have these conversations because as as I've been reflecting, rarely do we, well, not only is it like the busy days of like just life and we're juggling different things, but there's so much going on. And so trying to process it is just a lot. And whether folks just zone out, put their blinders on, they sometimes end up with burnout, unfortunately, because they're overwhelmed by the information. So I think creating spaces for us to have these conversations is ever so necessary. It's actually, I find it to be healthy, relaxing, and helpful for my own like soul searching mental health. So I thank you for offering today's conversation topic. So if you might, we're going to delve initially into a brief explanation between private pain and public issues. From your perspective, and then also C. Wright Mill's conceptualization of personal troubles and public issues in 1959. If you can uh, introduce us to that and kind of frame the space that we're in today, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jose, for having me and for the warm introduction. And I appreciate it very much. And I appreciate what you're doing because this kind of dialogue is absolutely essential for us to build a network of like-minded individuals who understand that we are all connected. The entire humanity is connected. Anyone who tries to divide us on superficial matters is ignoring the whole cosmic power that exists in each of us. So I appreciate very much what you're doing and the contribution you are making to the well-being of individuals, groups, and societies, communities and societies. So it was C. Wright Mills, yes, absolutely, you're right, who introduced the notion of public issues and private troubles. He used private troubles in 1959 in his book on his whole conceptualization of the sociological imagination. And I use it slightly differently because it's not just private troubles, but it's also private pain. And troubles could be, external, but pain is very much an internalized process. And so, in fact, in my doctoral program at Berkeley, one of my qualifying papers was on public issues, private pain with regard to depression as mental health problem, that brings with it a tremendous amount of pain for individuals. And at the same time, if you go to the root of depression and some of the both contributing factors and causal factors, although there are biological factors now we know associated with depression, we have to have both the biological factors and the environmental factors to give rise to individuals a lack of interest in living, because that is a clinical depression. And it's common for people to say they're depressed, but what is considered as clinical depression, according to the Center for Sociological Epidemiological Surveys, say scale on depression, for instance. We have several measurements to measure depression. But if you want to use that scales as a measurement tool, measure depression to see if someone is clinically depressed and in need of treatment, if you look at the attributes, I mean, most of them are very much an individual's response to being overwhelmed by factors in life, right? And so therefore, what is private and private trouble, as C. Wright Mills call it, and what is private pain, as I sort of distinguish from it, private pain arising from private troubles, are not isolated. They collectively, represent a public problem. To give you a good example, for instance, if we, 2023, the U.S. Census Bureau came up with the children's poverty rate among children, what percentage of children live below the poverty line, and the official threshold is about $30,900 per year for from a family size of 2 adults and 2 children. And it's unfathomable to see how, under today's cost of living, a family of four can, live on $30,900 a year. But that is the official threshold. This is a little different than supplemental threshold, which is which adjusts for safety net features and tax incentive, tax credits, and so on and so forth. But let's say, according to the official statistics, about 12.5% of the children live in poverty, in the United States, and this is the richest country in the world. And about 12.5% of the children live in poverty. That is a collective measurement, right? It's a public issue, because when that many children live in poverty, their health is going to be impacted, their access to education is going to be impacted, their access to social, enriching programs is going to be impacted, because in United States, many of the places, it is the property taxes that fund public education. And poverty, we have for poverty, certain neighborhoods that have concentrated levels of poverty. And those concentrated levels of poverty are also neighborhoods where members of minority communities live. So say, for instance, in 2023, 1 in 5 the children with Latinx background live in poverty. And then with the 2021 expanded child tax credits under President Biden's administration, because of COVID and other factors, and because of President Biden's administration's policies, reduced the poverty rate considerably. 8% of children lived in poverty. It was the expanded child credit was enormously successful in reducing the poverty rate, the number of children who lived below the poverty line. So knowing, as it is, we have a very poor measurement mechanism, if you really take into account the cost of living and the measurement or the threshold that we have, $30,900 for a family of four, to be considered as living below the poverty line. If we expand it, many American families were living below the poverty line. It's not just 12.5% of the collective, and according to SPM, it's about 14.5% if you adjust for, all the factors, and we'll take a sort of realistic assessment of what is the poverty rate. What is critically important is that these are not just indicators of failures of a system. These are also indicators of what is considered as public and what is considered as private. It's a failure to acknowledge that these two are embedded in each other. There is clearly no distinction between public and private. What is public is transfused or sort of infused into the private experience of that public issues. So income inequality, United States has the highest income inequality than any other developed nation in the world. We have an income inequality as measured by Gini coefficient. We has the highest income inequality, and we haven't made an effort to address that. We still have some of the lowest, the minimum living wage, federal minimum wage is still considerably low, like 7.25% to $7.25, sorry, is per hour is considerably inadequate for individuals to live on. Of course, states have increased the minimum wage. California has increased it considerably. Other states have increased it too, but there are states where still minimum wage is inadequate to even feed oneself. So when you add housing costs to healthcare, transportation, and education expense, it is almost impossible for a family to have one breadwinner who is actually working in a minimum wage job to be able to feed their children, to be able to provide her a roof over their head, to be able to meet their healthcare needs, to be able to, offer a reliable transportation. And then we wonder why there is so much child neglect. So, what we are not addressing as a public issue, what we address as an individual's private responsibility to pull themselves by their own bootstraps, that's the American, way until, President Roosevelt introduced this, and President Lyndon Johnson started this, President Roosevelt started this. So, as a result of 1935 Social Security Act, started this New Deal, and President Johnson started this Great Society programs and War on Poverty programs. Those programs helped. But at the same time, people started asking, hey, why is it that I'm working two jobs, three jobs, and still I'm not able to, stop me living from paycheck to paycheck, which is an experience of many American families. So therefore, children go to school and see, even in a public school, some of their peers being able to afford things that they're not able to, and children internalize that. And then we have the statistic that shows that for a child who grows up in poverty, they have to make 25% more effort just to be able to get the same grade level, grades in school, just to get the same academic performance, just because of all the factors that accompany living in poverty, what it means. So, therefore, when we take the example of poverty, child poverty, and families living in poverty, that might be a public issue that transcends into individuals' personal lives as tremendous disadvantage, as private pain in terms of undervaluation of themselves, in terms of their self-actualization potential. And also it impacts their physical health, it impacts their mental health. So it's not just troubles, it becomes pain as well in many different ways. And as we'll, proceed in the dialogue, we will further see how it translates into, political realm and governance issues as well.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for that breakdown of the private and the public and how everything is interconnected, and how we need to get beyond. And I think that's part of, I mean, I think it's human nature. We tend to want to, we like categorizing things. We like, I don't know if it's just being organized or maybe life is too complicated, or not wanting to accept how complicated or how, shifting perspective, how beautiful life can be, the fact that there is this wide array of different ways to do things and different types of people and different, you know, perspectives out there, that it is simpler or within the context of a business to categorize things and to organize it in that way. And simultaneously, though, that ends up taking the individual aspect of things out. And so once more, we're not creating policies or services for everyone included. We're just creating what we think might be inclusive of some people. Um, and so yeah, it is. It's sad to say the least. But no, thank you. So the impact of currently predominant public issues of political polarization on governance, policy development, and resources for children and families. I was hoping you can maybe go a little bit into that, as well as like how does political polarization affect the governance process and its principles?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have to go a little bit. I don't want to go reach far back, but we can start with the Great Depression, right? The Great Depression and the Social Security Act. And so the Great Depression of the 1929 stock market crash, came about because of unregulated, private interest and unregulated, capitalistic interest. There's nothing wrong with capitalism. I think it's the best model, in my view, educated view, that we could have because it provides opportunities for individual enterprise, for creativity, and collectively for societies to grow. But it has to be regulated to some degree. Otherwise, unmitigated greed can pave way for self-aggrandizement of certain individuals. And when those individuals have pathological needs of power or narcissistic tendencies, they can manipulate the system and by influencing the politicians, which is exactly what happened, in terms of deregulation of measures that were established to make sure that, lending institutions and banks and all those who were investing followed the rules. And that didn't happen. And then we had all these regulatory mechanisms, and then we had the preventive programs via the Social Security Act and all the other programs associated with it, so that, for instance, when the older Americans are unable to replace the income that they have been earning, they would be able to continue to maintain the adequate standard of living. Adequacy is one of the principles of Social Security. Adequacy and equity, and so that to a proportional amount of what we all contribute in our payroll tax would be matched by the employer, and then it's all paid out when they retire until the end of their life. But even within that, there is discrepancy. There is private issues and private pain, sorry, and private troubles from public issues. So let's take Social Security as an example, right? And where President Roosevelt was very thoughtful, and Eleanor Roosevelt, his wife, was an amazingly outstanding, sensitive person who said that a mark of a civilized society is how it treats its children and its older persons and its vulnerable populations, including the elderly. So these were, along with the Social Security Act, there were also other programs meant to help children and families. So it was a very well planned safety net that was established. But fast forward, President Bush Jr.'s time, there were talk about privatizing Social Security, so that people can opt out of Social Security program and they can opt out of payroll tax and so on and so forth. That was almost entirely a factor that should have never been even considered. Even now, we have talks of in the current administration, again because of PACs and others who are who want to do away with this safety net it's essentially an entitlement program, Social Security, because most individuals have paid into the system, and you and I have already far too qualified, because you need 40 credits to qualify for the program, and most individuals have worked much more than what they would need to get the 40 credits, right? So therefore, essentially, we are paying in a way more than we can afford to pay, right? Most middle class and anyone who pays 7.65% Social Security tax, and most of it is the payroll tax, and about 1.5%, 50% goes to the Medicare tax. But when you go to the, upper income, because it's a tax that's waged on, that is based on the wages you earn, your earnings, right? But if you go to upper income earners, they stop paying their payroll tax after a certain amount. So it's essentially a regressive tax. It's not a progressive tax. It's a regressive tax because it doesn't take the person's ability to earn into account, right? So it prefers the upper earners as opposed to the lower earners. And so therefore, it is essentially a tax. And some would argue, well, it's progressive because even if you earned below what would qualify you for the program, as long as you earn those required credits, you still get what is necessary to maintain an adequate standard of living, right? So therefore, it's progressive. It is redistributive. So I'm giving this as an example. It could be a little bit, sort of policy, and people who don't like policy don't like the tax discussion of it. But it's extremely important to understand that the entire system, the public framework, is being upheld by those who have the power elite, right? And they are not going to make policies the interest of those who do not have power, which is the lower income families. They don't have money to contribute to political candidates, and they don't have money to contribute to electing those who have the interests of the public and the average Americans and their families and their heart. So therefore, it is essentially a system that could lead to polarization because people who are consistently living from paycheck to paycheck and not going anywhere and not realizing the so-called American dream are asking, what am I doing wrong that I'm working so hard? I am doing everything by the book, and I'm still not being able to even afford a vacation without indebting myself through getting a credit card and so on and so forth. So then someone comes along and promises them everything that they are seeking. I'm going to raise your standard of living. I'm going to just elect me. You'll never have to elect somebody else, and so on and so forth. And so people are desperate to believe in someone who can give them the kind of life that they believe they're entitled to or they want. And then they are trying to sort of rationalize everything that person says and elect that person. And that person, if is that person is a polarizing figure, it is extremely difficult to stop that level of polarization, right? So people want to sort of simplify it and say, oh, it is Democrats versus Republicans. It is, independents versus this, that. But it's much more complex than that. Majority of the what we call as rural resentment comes from the fact that when you look at the child poverty rate, many of the poverty-ridden communities are in the rural area. In fact, 30% of the children who live below the poverty line, and their families live in the rural America. And so we have analysts have come up and said, rural resentment is a factor that actually contributes to polarization. People in the rural area believe that they have been left out of this American dream prospect, and they are trained by politicians to perceive the minority groups who receive some extra little bit of additional programs or opportunities through DEI programs as a threat to their well-being. But they are not told all the sacrifices that the minority groups have made over years and years and the troubles that they went ahead, that experience, that in order for them to be lifted out of poverty, that they needed this little extra safety net, that everyone enjoys. In fact, and the myth is that minority members of minority groups, families, are on welfare. It is an entirely myth. The majority of the individuals on receiving welfare programs are actually the majority communities, And so, despite that fact, they are being trained to believe that it is the minority groups that are the threats to their well-being. So as long as, let's say, Caucasians and African Americans and Latinx and Asians, as long as they fight each other, those who are continuing to make money can continue to make money. People are not going to ask the hard questions. Hey, why do we have such income disparity? Why can Elon Musk can afford to spend $270 million in an election,
Mm.
and average American families are
Yeah.
not even able to have basic health care without going into indebtedness? And people are not asking those hard questions because they are trained to believe that somehow it is the small amount of safety net programs that the members of minority groups enjoy, which is, by the way, for everyone, is the problem. And they are made to see older persons receiving Social Security as the problem, which is not, as I told you in the beginning of our conversation, before we started this dialogue. I was in this morning, I saw someone holding a sign saying, veteran, 10 years, and please help. And he has this little cardboard sign and it looked so sad. And it moved me like many, seeing children, for instance, sometimes panhandling or children walking without shoes. In the United States of America, the highest the nation that is richest in the world, most billionaires are here. Now we just had someone who probably crossed to the trillion level. There is an artificially propped up system that is fundamentally unequal. And it is not Americans who should be fighting each other. We had to look at the system and the level of polarization that is being unleashed on American public, where they are made to hate each other instead of dialoguing with each other, as coming together as one nation and saying, how can we solve our problems? How can we prevent this polarization? Because this polarization helps in having the kind of poor public policies that we have, instead of focusing on our children as public good. Our children, when families are being able to educate their children well, feed their children well, take care of their healthcare needs, spend enough time with them instead of having to work 2 or 3 jobs, and helping them do their homework, take them to extracurricular activities, nourish them and nurture them. Then, as a society, we are focusing on, reducing the private pain and reducing the impact of public issues on individuals' private lives. That's what we need. Now, polarization by politicians, no matter which party they are, is an unhealthy process that prevents us from looking at public issues for what they are, instead of blaming each other and increasing the private pain of individuals who are already burdened by having to toil to make these billionaires live in luxury and even in their perversions and all that kind of nonsense. So I mean, I'm little maybe I sound a little judgmental. I'm the least judgmental person, but we have to call when a society crosses a certain line and makes it seem unaffordable for most American families, even basic needs as food, nutritious food, and a decent health care, decent dental care, decent education, and affordable college education, and all of that it becomes problematic. And so I do tremendous amount of public service. In fact, all I do now is volunteer work, and I do every day. And people ask, "Oh, why do you work so hard? You have retired. You're 66 years old. You've done your job." Like, no, until I have the capacity, I'm going to do everything in my power to leave the world a better place than I found it. Not because it doesn't stop with just my children, and because just because my children are happy and successful, it doesn't mean that I have done my duty. My duty extends to my country, my society, my community. So it's almost like there is no value if you do work without monetary reimbursement. But and that's how much our society has come to value money, as if it is because of, again, these politicians and their approach to how they prioritize, on those who can contribute to their elections, as somehow their interests are more important than children. Obviously, they cannot contribute, so their rights are less important. What we are doing to American children is the greatest tragedy perpetrated on this planet. I would go so far as to say. Yeah, I'll explain why that is in our conversation as we proceed. Yeah.
I mean, I think as I'm hearing you, yeah, there's a lot of noise that just kind of distracts folks, and to kind of take it to a couple of places where of what you just stated of how, yeah, I mean, the polarization, the fighting between different groups, it does benefit others. I mean, if we not to pick on social media, but uh, there's algorithms and that
Mhm.
back and forth banter, frustration between folks, that's money making right there.
Mhm.
So it actually is more of a benefit for groups to not be on the same page as a, it's better for them to have a disagreement. Now, talking about you brought up like healthcare and education. Um, Also, like I'm, you mentioned one of the things we haven't, or maybe we haven't talked about is like we live in a capitalist society. I feel like that's part of what is perpetuating it all. At the bottom line is it's not so much that moral compass, it's money, it's the dollar bills. Like, how am I going to make money? And it doesn't matter whether it's overstepping people's lives or lived experiences. It's Yeah, it's not just making money for whoever is the person in charge, but many of them have like a board, or investors, or so you got to take that into consideration as well. That so it is so I brought up I brought in into the conversation the moral compass or the ethics. Is there even space for that, or it's just
Mhm.
been long forgotten? Because is there space for ethics and the moral compass in the capitalist society? Um, I
Yeah,
mean, and I guess that's where the policies go into play, where hopefully the policies are supposed to help find some kind of balance between the two. But once more, as you mentioned, you have companies who end up just having yeah, there's donations to campaigns, and all of a sudden it's like I'm helping you out here, and so maybe you can help me out later. And so yeah, it's not to bring people who are listening
yeah.
down, but shifting a little to how is you know um I don't know if you have ideas, or how can what can we do? There's the creating awareness of it. Um, there's there's a big, just to reiterate also what you stated, there is a big loss to children. And I wouldn't say, I will push back a little on the children in the US have a very I think across the world, it's interesting to I just I mean I try to be an eternal optimist. I do see where we are historically right now and how challenging things might be for our youth across the world. I also, as an eternal optimist, I have hope that if I shift back to 80 years ago when World War II was ending, or maybe 85 years ago when World War II was starting, um, people must have had similar mindset of like, this is like the most challenging, difficult time. How are we going to move forward? And humanity has found a way, as history has shown us. So as an optimist, I try to be hopeful for that. But I wonder if you have any kind
Yeah,
of
oh,
clues
absolutely.
into, what
Yeah.
inspires you, what gives you hope.
No, I share your optimism, Jose. I'm also an extremely optimistic, hopeful person. Otherwise, I would be dead, you know.
Yeah.
Hope, faith, love, justice, all of these matters to me because that's all we'll take with us when we leave this world. This body is food for worms almost in 2 days, depending upon, if you have a burial or if you want to be incinerated or however it is. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
and so it's nothing. So therefore, how we live our life matters. So I am optimistic. However, you talked of Second World War, right? The Second World War, 6 million Jewish people were murdered. I was a Fulbright scholar in Germany, and then as part of so I studied this process. And so we came out of it, and you said that, it was hopeless. And Hiroshima, we know what happened in Japan, the atomic bomb. So destruction and murder and deception and everything was there in Second World War. But it didn't start. It started in 1930s, Second World
Mhm.
War. Hitler invaded Poland on 15th of November, 1939. But he had already established his Nazi agenda very much. And people went with that. People knew something was terribly wrong, but they accepted it, and decent people. And I kept asking, what would have made the people who are by all means decent outlook on life to come down to that level, to almost to evil, to level of an evil where they thought the only way they could have a validity to their lives is by destroying innocent people, right? That's what Nazi Germany was, and that's the culmination of the Second World War. So when we think about we came back from it, we have to ask what led to it and what was the cost that humanity paid. And so, should we have to pay that cost again? And I don't think capitalism is the problem. Capitalism is absolutely not the problem. We have capitalist societies like Norway, where they have wealth and they have income and they have, but it's a regulated capitalist society. They have taxes that the rich people who can afford to pay taxes pay, and so that the society as a whole doesn't have the kind of impoverishment that we have. A friend of mine went to Norway and studied there, and I mean, she studied the system called Catherine Van Former, and I reviewed one of her books. She used to teach at I'm not sure whether she's still there, in Iowa State, and so she worked with them, and she wrote saying the values that they have are foundationally fair values oriented at collective well-being. In fact, in Norway, it's considered as almost disrespectful to identify yourself as belonging to the upper class, because it's considered as a not a good thing, that you want to be, identified with everyone. And you it's very rare to see a homeless person in Norway. They make sure everyone has an affordable, I mean, everyone has a home, and so they have an affordable housing policy where citizens can afford to have a roof over their head, which is a fundamental need in Maslow's hierarchy of needs to be able to actualize our higher goals. So therefore, capitalism is not the problem. It is unfettered greed. It is a political system that encourages that greed, a political system that is being paid for by those who have that greed, those who rationalize benefiting from the continuous hard work of people, the public, to enrich themselves instead of sharing it with them. And at least to some extent, I mean, say, okay, be rich, maybe 1,000 times richer than the person, but 10,000 times richer than the average person. It doesn't, you don't need that much money. What is someone going to do with all that money other than to put it to uses for perversion, for dominance, for, but when a human being has that much money, they don't know what to do with. But there are exceptions, like, Jeff Bezos' wife, for instance, she's donating money to colleges very quietly. Scott McKinsey, and Jeff Bezos, the Amazon former CEO and founder, and they found the company together, and she got, as part of the divorce settlement, a considerable amount of money, and she said it was made from the people who bought all this, and so she has an obligation to share it with them. But what do other people do? They may spend enormous amount of money in making their lips bigger than what it is through plastic surgery, and I mean, it's an individual prerogative, and to make their body parts appear completely out of what they had to do with they were born with, and so on and so forth, just for physical appearance. People might spend millions of dollars, but that's their prerogative. They could do that, but do it within certain proportion. And there are others who, football players and other. There was another lady, I forget her name, I mentioned in our last podcast too, who gave millions of dollars to Bronx Medical College, saying anyone who wants to pursue a medical education should have the opportunity to do so. So scholarship for children who from lower income neighborhood who will not be able to afford a professional education. She did that, and there are so many others who are doing that. One of the Kansas City Chiefs. They're not my favorite team, but nevertheless, I think he gave like millions of dollars of money for a transitional home for foster youth and for incarcerated individuals, and there are others who are doing similar programs. So, Keanu Reeves, the actor, who gives so much money for public causes. So there are people who make that money but reinvest it back into the community, as opposed to creating destructive tools. Like what we are seeing now, destructive tools that are destroying the fabric of the society. And that kind of tide we need to stop. And, like you mentioned in the algorithms, that feed on anger, that feed on hate. We have three teenagers who took their lives by listening to artificial chat GPT, and just that told them that it is that they was this AI tool to convince them to as an option to take their own life. And they were mechanisms, apparently. I don't know all the details because I don't understand that. But according to those who understand it and those who have written about it, there are mechanisms that could have put the necessary guardrails to prevent that from happening. But they were not put because the mechanism focuses on making profit. And those families have filed lawsuits, and let's wait and see what's going to happen. But nevertheless, the point is that we don't have to be on each other's throat. It's not the rich versus the poor. It is not, this ethnic group versus that ethnic group. We are all one human race. That's all we are, one humanity. We are a large family of human beings. How do we look at each other's need as our own need and help each other instead of saying, oh, too bad, this is what it is, this is what you got. if you support me, give money for my election, I support you. And if you don't, I'm not going to support you. That is the most destructive approach to governing. That is the most destructive approach to establishing public policies. If we can see the public policies that have been instituted since the beginning of this year are devastating older Americans, and they're not sure whether their Social Security is going to be there. Devastating families, school lunches are being cut, and programs that would help individuals who are struggling to find, housing, individuals who are struggling to find childcare, individuals who are struggling to find capacity building programs, it's all quietly being cut. The entire Department of Education is eviscerated in ways that we could have never fathomed that it could happen. And teachers don't know how to deal with the demand for quality education programs and supplies, and some of them spend their own money. And but at the same time, federal dollars are being proposed to be used for things like someone, I think it was Ali Velshi, who had but I had heard about it before, but he had it in his program where they're preparing to replace education with videos like, oh, women, when women smile, this is actual content of a video, they light up a whole room. So women, just smile more, and don't fight with about your rights and something to that effect, or just so simplistic, idiotic approach to complex issues, where women and men ought to respect each other, to love each other, not to see each other as enemies, or any identification or orientation that a person wants to identify with. It should be possible for them to live in a society without their lives being threatened. So we want to encourage public governance that understands that people's lives are inextricably linked to public issues, inextricably linked to public governance. So therefore, we need to address the fundamental erosion of morality and fundamental erosion of trust that politicians should evoke in the public. Instead, they say one thing to get elected, and when they get elected, they forget their promises. They want to support those who got them elected, and those who got them elected accumulate money through excessive greed through the tax system, where Warren Buffett said, who is a respectable gentleman and a respectable citizen and a human being who's donated almost all of his money for public causes, he said that his secretary pays more taxes than he does. There are owners of, but he pays taxes because he chooses to, but there are owners of extremely successful, companies, corporations that almost pay no taxes on their personal wealth. And the entire tax system needs a reform that needs to be in the interest of the public, and it has to be a progressive tax system, not a regressive tax system. Sales tax is a regressive tax. When we buy a loaf of bread, you and I go to buy a loaf of bread, and someone with this person, like this person who was standing this morning with a cardboard that said, veteran who has worked for 10 years, 10 years veteran, he didn't say work, 10 years veteran, and still, begging for money. When he goes to buy a loaf of bread, he would pay the same sales tax in those states that have sales tax. So that is a regressive tax. And the income tax is supposed to be a progressive tax, but if it is, it's anything but progressive. It in fact taxes, proportionally speaking, considering the capacity to pay, it taxes the lower income and middle class more. Yes, of course, we have earned income tax credit if you earn a certain amount and if your family size is such and such, but that is nothing. For a family to pay childcare, until the child reaches the fifth year of age, it costs in the ranges 120,000 to 160,000. That's how much childcare cost. In places like Arlington, Virginia, and places like, in Washington, D.C., and other places, it is families are struggling just to be able to pay childcare. It's so bad that sometimes one parent assumes the entire caregiving responsibility because otherwise they would both be working just to be able to pay childcare. And that should not be the case. Universal childcare should be the first option. And universal health care for children and families should be absolutely a priority, a policy. And, if a politician says, elect me, I'll meet all your needs, and he comes to, he gets elected on his false promises, should be held accountable for those false promises and should be held saying, oh, why did you make these promises when you're actually taking American families and children in the opposite direction? Our entire safety is threatened in so many ways, and our international image has come down dramatically. And forget about image, our international capacity to engage with our allies and in ways that benefit our country, our countries, and everyone in the world. And by eviscerating USAID, we have decimated the trust that the world had on America's capacity for compassionate activities, and it would provide a tremendous amount of soft power for us in the world. That's one of the reasons why we have the USAID program. And by eliminating it, and this administration said, let tons of the hundreds of thousands of millions of tons of food waste rot. Let it rot instead of being given to the poor. Let medicines be thrown out instead of being given to the poor. And children are dying in the world because the aid we promised is being withheld. I mean, that is fundamental immorality at the public level. That is impacting private lives. That is robbing societies and USAID workers in our own country, extremely talented individuals who have lost their jobs. I met one in one of the mentoring workshops that we had. University of California at Berkeley has a center in Washington, D.C., and UC Berkeley has sometimes hosts these mentoring sessions, evenings, where we mentor those students who are in the capital for internships and, meet with them. Sorry, I'm sorry. And
No, no, it's okay. Well, no, thank you so much.
yeah,
And I think you provide some really great examples, and thank you for that perspective. Just because, so there is going back to there's greed, uh, and yeah, just wondering what can we do better? Is it just like a lack of, I sometimes think like thinking of like we don't put enough funding into like good public education for our communities in the US, and education is different across the nation. It's not as though the same education you're getting in like the East Coast is the same as the West Coast or the Midwest, North or the South. And so it's yeah, just going back to that greed and the restructuring of voting restriction. I think they're changing, how the districts within different states as well. Um, but yeah, I just to shift a little to we were talking about polarized governance, the impact of the lives of children and families. We kind of went a little bit into that, but we touched upon this but didn't delve too much into it. But PACs, so interfere with the narrowing of public issues on many fronts. How does this affect the lives of children and families? I imagine a lot of it, the it's more of the corporate interest than um, and so additionally with that, how does the public issue of the lack of transparency in public development impact the lives of children and lives? For instance, we talked about AI and dangers of companies building algorithms uh, that take the well-being of children the primary factor in development of these tools. So thank you for covering that. I think one of the things that also just as I'm contemplating it is that I think you alluded to when we were talking about hope, and going back to being of service, and you devote your time. You're retired now, and so you don't have to be devoting your time to volunteering. You can very easily just be like, I'm going to travel the world and um, one cruise or go on a road trip, and so having that purpose, and I imagine a lot of that kind of going back to the way you were raised, how you were brought up, what not only what you were taught in the household, but what you were taught, or what was modeled for you in the school systems. And so, have we gotten away from that, unfortunately? Uh, yeah, just there's a lot. Is it possible to have a model that minimizes the private difficulties caused by public issues? I don't know that. I mean, I'm just kind of like throwing out a lot of different questions here,
No,
but
no, 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 no.
um,
You're exactly on track because my mind, as I listen, say they're all connected.
yeah, no,
Absolutely,
most
they're all
definitely.
connected. Yeah, because as I was saying, and let me finish the incident. So at the UC-DC, University of California, Berkeley, Washington D.C. mentoring gathering, this UC Berkeley graduate, say senior, who has worked in the USAID program for a long time. And she is one of the last persons to work in this this sort of this leftover part of the USAID until September. And she said even her job is going to go away in September just to tie the pieces together. They even, in fact, had to leave their building and all of that. And she was saying how traumatic it is for all the workers who have invested there. Like speaking of service, many of them joined USAID because they wanted to serve. That was their principal goal. She graduated from Berkeley with very high honors, and she could have gone into any other field, but she chose USAID to work for her because of her commitment to service. She did not have money as the goal. I mean, although she had a job and it was sufficient and it paid relatively well, but all the experience that she and her colleagues had by working for an international organization that prioritize serving the entire humanity and at the same time improving visibility for United States. After all, American corporations were going and opening franchises everywhere in the world, and therefore, why not American aid organization go and help people in the world? After all, if you're making money off them, then might as well help them as well and increase the soft power for United States and in so many ways. And it also provided so many other functions. So therefore, listening to her, it occurred to me that even we are discouraging individuals who have a noble outlook towards life as something that is not in their best interest. So you're asking, how do we develop a model that would have an outlook that is very much based on the service, public service, excellence, working hard, and doing your best, and with faith, an internal value system, and seeing our fellow brothers and sisters as part of one humanity, not wanting to be on top of others, but wanting to be, equal. We can do all of that in a capitalist society. So those who take advantage of this divisive and divide and conquer model, once you say every time you say we need a universal health care, that their go-to phrase is, oh, that's socialism. And anytime you say, we want a universal childcare, oh, that is socialism. We want competition. That is such nonsense. If you have competition that is set to for enrich few people at the expense of millions, then that is not for good governance policy. We can have capitalism with moderation, with regulation, with the interest of the consumers to benefit children and families. In order to do that, we need to acknowledge that society has a role to play, the public domain, the public issues, the public policy-making mechanisms have a tremendous impact on people's personal lives. Let me give you another example. For instance, let's say, this USAID worker who has worked so much and now she's now in her 30s. And let's say, I don't know, I didn't have time to ask if she has children, and because I was just impacted by the process of how USAID was dismantled and decimated, as some of it, as she shared. So I didn't want to ask her. But let's say she had children and she has lost her job. Maybe she got a severance or something. Maybe after 6 months, she is looking for jobs. She's not able to find a job. There are many in that category now for federal workers who were fired or not being able to find jobs. And so she one day, let's say she has small children and her 5-year-old and her 9-year-old, and she's asking a 9-year-old, saying she's unable to afford childcare because she's looked, and the childcare that she can afford is in areas that she doesn't want to take or maybe it has 30 children for or 20 children for one worker. It shouldn't be allowed, but there are childcare for centers that operate with a ratio of one person, one adult to 20 children. And she doesn't want to take them, so she says, leaves them well attended, and she has say a camera that she can see for her children, and she leaves the home for just maybe an hour to attend an interview. And then she comes, and let's say, this is a hypothetical situation, right? Because this has happened in other people's life and other times. And while she's gone, her child dropped soda, and it got something, drenched, and the child went to take a towel, and maybe she fell down in the process and she started crying. And so the baby, in the 5-year-old, started crying. The 9-year-old, then didn't know what to do instead of calling her mother. So the neighbor comes in, and the neighbor calls the CPS. So CPS comes and says, you should not have left your 9-year-old, which is absolutely the truth. She should not have, under the care to care for a 5-year-old. And so, they remove the children from her place. And I mean, often it does not as drastic. They come up with a trip plan and support services and all that. But then there are some places where they will remove the children, especially if the mother, because of this being fired, she is stressed, and she is worried, and she doesn't have things together, and so they remove the children. Maybe at that point it's better to remove the children, because sometimes CPS workers go and don't remove the children, and if the mother especially has a substance abuse problem, and then that could become problematic, and so children have been hurt, and while left under, then there's infant mortality and child mortality. That's a different story. But in this case, the mother may be a very diligent mother. She had no option because of public issues, that where a worker can be fired at will with no cause because someone decided in their drastic narcissistic nightmare that it's better to get rid of USAID, which serves so many people and so many functions, and got someone who was addicted to substances to be in charge of letting go of thousands of federal workers who held up our system. Now they're hiring some of those workers. It makes absolutely no sense. This kind of inconsistent policies without any thought to the welfare of the people, welfare of the nation, by politicians who are in the pockets of those who can pay them highest amount of money to get them elected, destroys the entire fabric of the society, as we are seeing now in so many ways. And so therefore, we can ask, what is a better model? It's not the value system of individuals. Parents are still raising children with the best values, but the role models that they have and their workplaces in our political system are abysmal. Children are asking, youth are asking, how can the Congress, how can members of our elected representatives support such policies? How can they stand? It's not just Republicans or Democrats. When they go to meet their constituents, those members of the Congress who are supporting such policies are being criticized by their constituents, and ask them, why do you keep quiet and vote for bills that destroy our families, our communities. They have no answer. They have just falsehood to justify their own inaction or their own support for abysmal policies that destroy societies and destroys children education. So it's not a matter of individual values. What they see as success, what is being peddled as success in front of them is actually corruption. Corruption is peddled as success. Absence of values is peddled as success. Indulging in, transient outcomes that harm other people or is peddled as success. So children grow up, youth grow up thinking this is success. The number of likes I get on Facebook is success. The number of how many people liked my TikTok video is success. So those are all false yardsticks, right? So under those circumstances, parents are at a loss as to what to do. And so I feel like there should be, just like we have mothers against drunk driving, we should have mothers against corporations, corrupt corporations that are destroying our families, mothers against corrupt social media companies that refuse to put the guardrails and prioritize their profits. We need to have mothers against, leaders, industry leaders who set a poor role model, especially they have no place in political system. They have no place to rise to the level of leaders if they are going to assault women, if they are going to abuse children, if they are going to, support policies that are causing or contributing to neglect of children and neglect of our older persons, neglect of our veterans, and supporting policies that are taking away house opportunities for housing, funding for housing. I mean, I can go on and on how the policies that have been the foundational structure of our safety net are being eliminated, and members of Congress are supporting it and or not being as active as they should be. Not all of them are supporting it. There are those who are speaking out, and a good example is gun control. I mean, we just saw how many children are living in fear when they go to school. How many have lost their lives due to gun control, and we still don't have a policy. We are given, it's a right to bear arms. It's a well-regulated militia you know that is our second Bill of Rights. Well-regulated military. It doesn't talk about, therefore, the right to bear arms. Yes, but it doesn't say that every Tom, Dick, and Harry should have a gun that is capable of taking so many lives. And if you look at the gun violence, it is not perpetrated by minorities, members of minority groups. It's not perpetrated by members of members with poor mental health. It's mostly by those who grew up in gun culture, in whose homes gun is a regular occurrence, presence, and in whose homes violence against other members of other communities, violence against children are normalized, and they are desensitized to this kind of violence. Someone walks into a church and takes the life of 12 African Americans who were praying. They invited him to pray, Dylan Roof, and he just shot them as if they are, not human beings. And that is atrociously dehumanizing, devastating. But there are individuals who defend that kind of nonsense and who encourage those kind of individuals with fragile egos to own guns, to engage in violence against members of their own human family. They are the ones who should be punished. They are the ones who should be taken to task. Melissa Hartman and her husband were gunned down for no fact. She was an quintessentially moral, valuable, assemblywoman. And she was gunned down for no reason other than the fact she was so perfect in supporting policies that were in the interest of families and children and her husband. And so judges who rule positively, keeping the constant factor that we have separation of powers in this country between the executive, legislative, and judicial sectors. They are being killed. They are being threatened. Members of the Congress who stand by our foundational principles are being threatened. These are all, unexpected outcomes in a democratic society as ours. And people who behave in a way that lead our children to act unthinkingly by creating harms to others should be held to be accountable for these kind of actions. And nobody should condone violence. We have to be a society that is nonviolent. I'm a strong believer in Gandhian principle of nonviolence. Love is far more stronger than hate. And I hope, that's my hope as an eternal optimist, that we would go to a society, a place which C. Wright Mills called the space of selfhood. We would all have a space of selfhood where we can have love and support for each other, and taking another life would be considered as absolutely unacceptable. It's ironic that those who want 10 commandments in school, where it clearly said, thou shalt not kill, they are the ones who are on a spree to kill each others and then justify those kind of killings. They are the ones who want everybody to have guns. They are the ones who pose for their Christmas greeting card with guns, all the entire family touting guns. They are the ones who chase after children who go to testify, children who witnessed school shootings and lost fellow students, their friends, to school shooting. When they go to testify in Congress, there are members of Congress who chase after them, who maybe before they became members, but now serving in the Congress, asking them why did they testify against guns, threatening children, asking them. And so these are reality. And so we have to go much deeper than blaming our values. It is the values of politicians who have much to gain economically, and their narcissistic power, their pathological power hunting, who are dividing our society, who are putting in place all that is negative by proclaiming that they are, following religious path and etc. and so on and so forth. Yeah.
I do thank you so much for sharing, and I do want to push back a little. I don't want folks that listening, to think that the overgeneralization, just because folks own guns doesn't mean that they are bound to go out there and hurt
Oh,
someone.
absolutely. Yeah,
I,
absolutely. I
I
agree with
find
you.
sometimes
Yeah.
they're the most responsible ones for to have those guns. And I find sometimes, I mean, the one thing we haven't talked about, what we briefly mentioned, was just like mental health and how there really isn't the adequate support and skill sets and people getting trained to assist folks. And maybe it's more the accessibility of being able to buy a gun so easily. You can go to your local shop and retailer that sells it.
Or 3D
Maybe there is,
guns.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's not consistent across the United States. It's, some states are like, oh, you need to have, the background check. While others are like, oh yeah, you're the right age, you got the money. Okay, here you go. And that's that. So I think I just shifting a little, like, I don't know if you have ideas on like how do we develop a people well-being appropriate governance model as we hopefully move forward in that direction. I mean, I imagine all things that go down at some point they have to come up, and so I'm waiting for that. But yeah,
No,
would love to learn more about that from you.
absolutely. I can again. I want to, because I don't want people to think that I'm against gun. Absolutely not. And responsible gun ownership should be absolutely supported. But we have than any other country in the world. We have more gun ownership. We have tremendous, and maybe if it is responsibly used, there's nothing wrong with that. But every other society who has had mass shooting has a nation, developed nation I'm talking about, has immediately taken steps to address that. And what is the best way that they addressed it? We can only go by evidence rather than by our own belief system, by limiting the supply of guns private gun ownership, but making it harder to own guns. And that's the way they limited it. UK, we have so many examples of country, Australia, New Zealand, and they just Sweden, and so many different ways in which gun ownership can be regulated, and responsible gun owners would still be able to have guns. At the same time, preventing gun shooting. I mean, every time there's a mass shooting, Sandy Hook and Columbine, and most recently in Colorado, and so many places, it's just now it's so normalized. It's not even news anymore. I think we should have had a much higher celebration than some of the other recent events for the children who witnessed their friends being gunned down, and say, let's have a rally to make sure that our children are made to feel safe. So I'm not at all against gun ownership, but responsible gun ownership. And I'm so glad, Jose, you talked about mental health, because in some states, 40 to 45% of children have mental health issues. So we might ask, why is that? Are Americans generally predisposed to mental health issues? Uh, Absolutely not. It is this, we work the hardest. American workers work the hardest than any other developed country. We work not only hardest, we do not have, like in Poland, for instance, when I was in Poland, taking international law classes one summer, as per from my university where I got my law degree from, my Polish friends would say, who are taking law classes too, that they have to almost mandatory for them to take a month of paid vacation, and they have the choice of going to spa or going to this and going to that. How did they develop it? Poland was, a socialist society, and within the clutches of Russia, and Walesa, I think, yeah, the Solidarity leader, who brought the country together as a tremendously charismatic leader. And now they have a thriving economy, a thriving, or a social system, and a thriving educational system. It's because they learned from their mistakes, and they say, we want a society that is there for everyone. Does Polish society have problems? Absolutely. Every society has problems, but they have emerged from their experience, learning, and that we are not going to stand for some things. We want to place our families. So families, when they spend time together, children feel nourished. As human beings, none of us are hardwired to believe that people who are supposed to take care of us, our parents, our significant adults, or can ignore us to the point of neglecting. Many American children grow up in households where neglect, corporal punishment, and so many other forms of abuse are somehow normalized. And children go to schools with uncared for appearances, and so many other ways in which their nutritional needs not addressed. And now we have a system where even basic, vaccination protection is being questioned. So everybody is entitled to their own value system. Nobody is saying that. We live in a free society, but you cannot impose your views on vaccination on other families. When in a school system, some children are vaccinated and others are not, and it doesn't help. The children even who are vaccinated may be vulnerable, and nobody has the right to do that. And so these are all complex issues, but ultimately we need to have talk by a leader who is wise enough, who is protective enough, who is understanding enough to address the crisis that our youth is facing. Our youth are in tremendously stressed capacities, and even when they are, asking the right questions, they don't have the right answers. They're not given the right answers, but because their teachers have to point out the contradictions in societies, and we are banning books. The same thing that happened in Nazi Germany. And I just finished reading a book which I read before, called Abba Eban, and My People, the History of the Jews, in which he talks about how the Nazi Germany not only were censored and executed those who made fun of them before then they become the Nazis rose to power. In the process of when they were rising to power, they also burned several books, including the books of by Thomas Mann, by Einstein, and every author who advanced a scientific approach, who advanced a sensible approach to humanity. They burned all those books. I saw the place where they actually burned all the books when I was a Fulbright scholar in Germany, and when I went after that the second time to do, continue my research. And so essentially, we know. And Germany, what has Germany done? They have learned from their experience, and any Nazi form of philosophy or any for Nazi symbols are absolutely forbidden. But does Germany have those emerging Nazi tide? Yes, absolutely. In fact, there are some from our own country who went there and supported that and that emerging tide, but they have strict rules. We have to have a generous policy, proactive policy, where we are strengthening families, where we are allowing, quality childcare, quality healthcare, quality nutrition program for our children. So our children know they are being valued. They are being valued for who they are. Their lives are extraordinary in every way possible. Every child should have a home. No child should be homeless. No child should be without basic health precautions. No child should be without basic nutrition. And basic, when I say basic, nutritionally, substantive, nutritionally adequate nutrition. And every child should have an opportunity from school to higher education, whether it's vocational or university education. And that child should be able to have a livelihood that is capable of earning livable wage, that is capable of, supporting that child into adulthood and his or her family as a unit. This is extremely basic to a human society. If we call ourselves as a human society and a developed one that, and as one that wants to set standard and framework for the rest of the world as we have been behaving, then we have an onus of responsibility to be that to our own children. That is not in the way of America First nonsense, because America First is America oriented toward children and families in a way that sets a model and that supports just as much benefit as we take from other societies. American corporations get a lot of benefit by expanding their corporate empire into other societies, and they get subsidies from our government. McDonald's used to get billions of dollars in subsidies to open their franchise in other parts of the world. Of course, they modify according to the tastes of the country. In India, in some places, they're different. And all the other corporations too. And so, therefore, they are taking American taxpayer money and providing these subsidies to this corporation, which is corporate welfare, which nobody talks about it, when the little bit of money that they spend on children's health care or children's nutrition programs, they are slashing that. That is unacceptable, right? Are you praying, Jose? I see you. Yeah, praying for a better world. Even as I speak, I know you're,
No, thank
yeah,
you. Thank you so much for
yeah,
the insights. And yeah, there is, yeah, we're shifting toward a very isolated society or country with a lot of the changes that are happening. And you mentioned US AID, and it's interesting. The terminology is like it's soft power, but I think it's actually quite powerful to have those relationships. It is ever so needed. I mean, and you can definitely see the shift in where there's certain countries around the world where just having a US passport was enough. You didn't need to get a special visa, uh, or yeah, anything like that. It was just like, oh, US passport. Okay, you can
yeah.
just come right on in. But no, things are shifting where there is a lack of that trust. now of that strong relationship that was there before. And so folks are, yeah, some countries are like, oh no, we want a bit of a, we want to make sure you're not going to come here and cause trouble. Um, so yeah, it is. I guess only time will tell, but I think they're definitely just to kind of. I want to make sure we kind of get to these questions here that we have. I don't know if you have ideas on like how can policymakers be educated or slash trained in the design of such policies that would be more focused on the well-being of the people. I know we talked about all the different factors that they get and it's fascinating because we do see a lot of new folks putting kind of their hat into uh the there's midterm elections coming up and yeah, there's new people, and there's some folks that have been there for quite some time who have just gotten very comfortable. And well, the people are speaking that they're not comfortable with that person that's there anymore. And so, folks that you, so yeah, I'm constantly seeing some new candidate, you know. So yeah, so just wonder if you have any
Yeah,
guidance or
yeah, very,
ideas,
yeah.
thoughts. Love to learn more. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so glad, Jose, you brought about the election process, right? And so in a midterm election, everybody's saying, oh, midterm elections, you have the power to, vote people in, and so this is a republic, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact is, in 2010, the United States Supreme Court issued a 5-4, ruling, the Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, right? What it said was that corporations should not have a limit, or corporations or unions and and similar entities should not have a limit on the amount of money that they give to the election process. And so there are, of course, restrictions on certain things. And if a PAC, a political action committee, there are up to $5,000 for a candidate and for this, and there are still limitations. But for what is called a super PAC, they can have their own mechanisms by spending as much money as they want in many nefarious ways to support a particular candidate. So super PACs that collect money, you know, millions of dollars. In the 23-24 election cycle, there were about $8.3 billion, billion, not million, that have been already collected by 24 between January of 23. I want to be precise here. January of 23 and April of 2024, they had already collected $8.3 billion from these super PACs. And 65% of the money came from super PACs. You know, that imagine that is a tremendous amount of money. That's a lot of money. And so that's about 5.3% or something like that, 3 billion, not percent, $5.3 billion by super PACs to the election process. So all these individuals who are running for to be senators and representatives, when they get elected, do you think they are going to support the average guy who gave $10? They don't even know. They're very clever. They will write, like, I get things like, Jude, have you seen what's happening? And when Donald Trump first ran in the first election, it was Ivanka Trump, I think her daughter, his daughter, who said, sent not just to me, to my colleagues too, and it came to all our official emails saying, oh, we have a new change that's going to come up. And so, because I used to be supportive of some Republican candidates and some Democratic candidates based on, my own understanding of whether they will be good for families and children and older persons and the vulnerable populations of that, whether they are ethical and moral. So, maybe they thought I was Republican, but I was actually well, anyway, my political thing is not a concern here. But the fact of the matter is that, it's important that we understand we will not have individuals who truly represent America until we do election reform. John McCain was diligent in supporting bipartisan. John McCain was a Republican, was bless him, or was diligent in supporting a bipartisan election reform, and very little came out of it. We still continue to have this enormous amount of money that is pouring in, that should not be allowed. And that is what is destroying the people's power to represent their interest. And so, what is we're talking about tariffs, we're talking about groceries. A friend of mine said she went to this, shop the other day and was astounded, flabbergasted to find that she cannot even afford the basic things that she thought she could afford in $100. So she left that place and went to the dollar store to buy her stuff. So when we talk of tariffs and increase in prices, do you think members of Congress now are worried because they get a good salary paid by taxpayers? Most of them, majority of them, have not experienced what it is to be poor in their lives. Many of them are able to even consider running for Congress or put their name in because they already have personal wealth system that they contribute. I mean, I'm not saying everyone who has wealth and who come to be a senator or a governor, Pritzker, for instance, governor of Illinois, is an amazing person in terms of, using his money and, for the public interest and protecting the citizens of Illinois from all kinds of intrusions by other nefarious characters. So essentially, we have a system where, as a matter of exception, some of those who come with hereditary money and resources, who didn't have to work for any of that thing, just sort of enjoy and preserve that, end up saying, oh, maybe I'll try my hand at politics. Our vice president, J.D. Vance, wrote the book Hillbilly, but he still went to Yale and, he, of course, encountered poverty and substance abuse growing up. He talks about it in his book and West Virginia experience, but he didn't grow up fully in West Virginia. He had several other positive mechanisms from his grandparents, and so which he also talks about. So that might be an exception, but even those who experience poverty, when they get money, what do they do? Do they want to support the tech, entrepreneurs and hoarders who are hoarding money and visualizing of living forever and colonizing Mars at the expense of destroying families? And I'm like, before one talks about colonizing Mars by the money that Americans toiled for by the setting up a system where someone can benefit so much, enormously, not benefit, I mean literally steal money from the toils of the people by expecting them to buy their products, by pricing them in a way, by having monopoly, and by having all those factors which are economic, rooted in economics, and they're not capitalism. They are unregulated capitalism. They are corrupt capitalist minds by ending with sort of with this nefarious collaboration. I wouldn't call it collaboration, nefarious collusion with politicians that deprive the true meaning of a republic, that deprive people of their rights to livelihood, to livable wages. Because if they provided livable wages, they cannot make all that profit enough to wanting to colonize other planets and let federal workers be fired and their families be destroyed, let USAID be eviscerated, and so many other programs destroying American families and children should not be the motive for their ill-advised projects like colonizing other planets or living forever and injecting themselves with 50 different supplements and with I mean, this is just a human body. We are all mortal beings, and accepting our mortality and doing good while we are alive and living responsibly by not taking drugs, by not consuming alcohol, by having a sensible diet. by living a moral life. It's possible to live fully, maybe up to 90 years if one lives well, without, I don't drink, I don't take substances because I believe I don't have the right to tell my children not to drink if I don't drink. And I don't, have never used substances. I am on primarily a pescatarian diet. It's possible to do all of that. And I exercise, I do yoga, I do Tai Chi, I do push-ups, and I took my children to have, take karate lessons. We all have black belt in karate. So it's possible. And of course, I had to sacrifice a lot and, sometimes work in my primary job as a professor and teach at a different university part-time, do all that, work terribly hard and in doing all of that. But is it possible for us to help other families? Absolutely. I'm not saying I'm an exception in any way, but there are millions of mothers and fathers who would do very much the same thing I'm doing if there is support for them, if there is essentially support from the government to help the children. I was in anyway, let's not go into other examples because I don't want to be
No,
diverging.
thank
But
you.
yeah, absolutely, public policies matter. In order for public policies that are sensible to be formulated, to be implemented in the right way, we
Yeah.
need politicians who understand the struggles of average Americans, ordinary Americans, Americans who have been denied the rights to exist. African Americans did not have the right to vote until the 1965, year of 1965. And that is unacceptable. I mean, they are citizens of this country. They're born and brought up here. And we know the Dred Scott decision and the one-third, value for a person's life. I mean, those were all atrocious things. So that happened in our country. To erase that from history and to, deny equal opportunities to historically underrepresented communities and to open it up to everyone who is economically underrepresented. There are many members of Caucasian communities who don't have the capacity to send their children to college. Let's make it possible for everyone who wants to go to college to be able to go to college and to be get the degrees, to work hard and all of that. So in order for those policies to come to the forefront, we need to have this election reform where this big corporate money does not control the election process. I'm not saying corporations are bad. I'm saying we need to bring corporate social responsibility to the forefront. We want ethical corporate social responsibility to be the prime concern and to put a limit on what they can spend on an election. So we need campaign reform, we need election, funding reform, and we need a Supreme Court that is sensitive to the people and, not issue rulings that are going to be detrimental to the sustenance of America, to the life of America, to the life of families and children. There are many judges at the district court levels and U.S. district courts who have issued tremendous rulings in support of the public, but they are being threatened and they are being taken to task and with serious consequences. And bless them. And we need more on the highest court of our country. And yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for your insights. As we bring this conversation to a close this time around, I know we'll have further conversations again, but I just want to sincerely thank you for, just your wisdom, your clarity, compassion, helping us navigate such complex but deeply human issues. I think one of the things that really resonates for me is also like becoming aware not only of our history, but also what's currently happening around the world. Because I mentioned this offline earlier, but I'll mention it now. There's so much like information out there, and if we just rely on one source, like if it's just our nightly news or just certain TV stations or certain papers, there's only so much that can be covered. I sometimes say there's so much noise out there. And so how do we dig between that? And so part of that is having these types of conversations to learn from each other because there's speak interests that you have that you're well versed in, and there's other ones that I can have, and then other folks as we make our circles bigger, and kind of goes
Yes.
back to those dialogues and having those
Yeah.
conversations and how important it is to have those. And also just being conscientious that just, I mean, for a while it used to be like, oh, you can sometimes through like social media you can kind of learn about some of the challenges or atrocities, human right violations that are happening in certain countries that the nightly news doesn't have the time to cover. But then with the rise of AI, you have, wait, can I believe this? Can I not? And there's like so much fake news out there. And so um at the end of the day, it is through, with technology, with all these different resources we developed and we have as human beings, like it's kind of getting back to basics,
Yes.
have meet people, connect with folks across the world. Thank you so much for, your introduction and connecting me with folks at Mediators Beyond Borders a couple of weeks ago. Had a wonderful conversation there, and I got to meet with folks, meet people in Germany and Kenya
Yeah.
and other parts of the world. And so it is through those ongoing conversations
Yeah.
that we're able to become more aware
Mm.
and educated on what is actually the lived experience of someone there, as opposed to what I'm being told by like the news or some book. Because let us not forget that the majority of our history books are written by those that survive it. And so, ever so often, you mentioned banned books a little bit. There is a lot that is still not in the know. And so I thank you. Thank you for, how we explored the intersectionalities of public policy and private pain. Just as a powerful reminder that behind every headline, every statistic, every policy decision, there are real lives being impacted, especially those of children and families. Um, and so it's ever so important to continue those conversations, to it's like there's a call. It's very clear, we want a just and compassionate society, but we must build systems that reflect those values, not just in words, but how we lead, legislate, and live together. Let's not forget our moral compass. You know,
Exactly.
uh, uh,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sometimes I always have to think like, going back to that golden rule, would you want to be treated this way? Then why do you think others would want to be
Exactly.
treated this way?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, to our listeners, thank you for joining us. May this conversation inspire you to engage more deeply, think more critically, and act more compassionately in your communities. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, keep building peace, one relationship, one policy, one courageous conversation at a time. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you,
Greatly appreciate
Jose.
you.
And
Thank
yeah,
you.
thank you for your time and for your commitment to this process. I appreciate it very
Thank you.
much.
And I know we'll continue to have more conversations. So
Yes. Yeah.
very excited for our next conversation soon to
Yeah.
come. Thank you.
Yeah.
Take
Thank
care.
you. Take care. Bye-bye.